Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that yesterday Ukraine struck the city of Moscow, the capital of the Russian Federation, using hundreds of drones, and during the previous day we received lots of videos on this matter, hundreds of drones flying over the city of Moscow and the Russia's attempts to bring these drones down. As a result of attack, the biggest oil refinery was hit by the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians dealt significant damage. As of the end of the 18th of June of 2026, we received a report that Russians managed to extinguish the fire and to stabilize the situation in the Moscow's region, but still we can see black smoke pillows over large parts of Moscow after Ukraine launched the major drone strike, hitting the Kapotnya oil refinery, the second hit, by the way, on that facility in less than a week. And when this attack ended and when the Russians extinguished the fire and stabilized the situation, most likely everybody expected that the Russians would retaliate. But as of the beginning of the 19th of June of 2026, we see that the Russians decided not to attack the territory of Ukraine, but the Russians decided to stay cold-minded. And when this attack ended, we start receiving a lot of reports from the European countries. For example, Netherlands decided to send Ukraine 500 million euro in weapons. For example, Belgium will deliver 7 additional F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine this year. For example, the United Kingdom announced a 996 million aid package for Ukraine, including 150,000 drones of various types, according to Reuters. Another important thing, for example, Ukraine will also receive Nomad's air defense systems. In 2024, Germany allocated funds for the purchase of Norway's Nomad systems, and the delivery of the systems to Ukraine has now been confirmed. Another important thing, that Swedish defense minister announced that Sweden, Norway and Canada have assembled a new military aid package for Kiev. Stockholm's contribution to the total will amount to 108 million. So as you can see, the European countries, as a result of the attack on the city of Moscow, decided to increase support of Kiev in weapons and arms, which means that the conflict on the territory of Ukraine will continue. The Russians didn't retaliate because the Russians most likely are trying to understand what's to the next and what targets to hit the next times. But at the same time, during the previous night between the 18th and the 19th of June of 2026, the Russians attacked the territory of Ukraine, and the sources reported that the Russians used 90 drones, and this is the smallest number since the beginning, probably even of this year. According to information we have, the Russians attacked the Odessa region, and the sources reported that a parking site was damaged, and in this video we can see a vehicle, civilians that were moving along the MA15 road, and in this video we can see how civilians were filming this parking site where a truck fuel was completely destroyed. Later we received additional pictures on this matter, and here we can see that the Russians, as a result of the overnight attack, destroyed these fuel trucks, which means that the Russians continue destroying and destruction of the logistics of the southwestern parts of Ukraine. Furthermore, the sources reported that the Russians attacked the Odessa port infrastructure during the previous night. Several blocks were destroyed by Russians as a result of Guerin strikes. As of the Zaporizhzhia direction, the sources reported that during the previous nights and during the previous days, the Russians continued attacking vehicles and trucks of the armed forces of Ukraine between the cities of Nikopol and Dnipro. Pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians have established complete fire control over the territory, and the Russians destroy every single truck and every single vehicle that uses this territory for the logistic purposes. In this video, we can see how a Ukrainian vehicle, civilian, probably was moving along the R73 road between the cities of Nikopol and Dnipro, and as you can see, according to this video, several trucks, probably military trucks of the armed forces of Ukraine, were destroyed on the way of this civilian. Another important thing is that the Russians during the previous night attacked the city of Zaporizhzhia. As for the city of Zaporizhzhia, another gas station was destroyed. Probably this is already a 50th gas station through the territory of Ukraine that was destroyed by Russians. And these pictures were published by pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian sources during the previous evening. Another important thing that the Russians continue preparing themselves before the beginning of some major things through the Crimea and Kherson direction. The Russians, after the Ukrainians increased their pressure on the Crimean logistics, began building more and more bridges through these territories. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that the Russians created a pontoon bridge, built a pontoon bridge to the north of the city of Volchevsk. Today we received the report that the Russians built several bridges and continue this process in the area of the city of Genichesk. In these pictures we can see vehicles, engineering equipment of the armed force of the Russian Federation that is trying to create bridges and crossings between Genichesk and Crimea. So as you can see, the Russians are about to stabilize the situation, and we can see that the Ukrainians still haven't launched anything, which means that the Ukrainians most likely lost any time for any opportunity. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in this Dnipropetrovsk-Zaporizhzhia direction. I would like to remind you that several days ago we received the report that the Ukrainians evacuated this territory. Today we received another report that the Ukrainians increased the area of evacuation. Today more villages and settlements fell into this black zone of evacuation. Today the sources reported that the Ukrainians decided to evacuate completely the settlement of Chaplina, the villages of Bandarna, Kasaeva, Petrivka, and so on. So, which means that the Ukrainians continue sending more and more troops in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation and not to allow the Russians to break through Ukraine's defenses. At the same time, the Russians see and understand how exactly the Ukrainians bring forces in this area. They are doing this through the settlement of Vasilievka, and during the previous night, the Russians once again attacked the settlement of Vasilievka with missiles and drones, and as a result of this attack, several buildings were basically reduced to ruins. Since the beginning of this month, the Russians have already carried out dozens of attacks in the direction of the settlement, trying to reduce the number of forces and buildings that the Ukrainians can use for the purposes to accumulate forces. Also, the Russians attacked the settlement of Pavlograd. As for this territory, we have just a video where we can see first seconds after the Russians attacked this territory with a drone. So as you can see, despite the fact that the Russians haven't retaliated, the Russians continue attacking the territory along the line of combat contact, trying to ruin the Ukraine's plans to deploy additional forces in this area. Furthermore, today the group of forces East made a very interesting statement. They stated that in coming days, maybe even in coming hours, they will make a very important announcement about additional progress on the ground. It seems that the group of forces East probably managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Pokrovsk or about to do this. So, according to all these statements made by the group of forces East, very likely that in coming days they will report about control either over the settlement of Pokrovsk or Velika Mikhailovka, and this is going to be something like a breakthrough. They explained the situation that the Ukrainians began evacuation of these territories because the group of forces East says that currently the river of Volcha is no longer a defense belt of the armed forces of Ukraine. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Slavyansk-Kostiantynivka agglomeration. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes were recorded. As for the Dobropolye direction, the Russians improved their positions around the settlement of Belitskaya. Currently, according to different sources, the settlement of Belitskaya was encircled by Russians from the south and from the north, which means that in coming days, most likely the village would be captured by Russians. Furthermore, the Russians intensified their artillery and aviation strikes to the south of the settlement of Dobropolye, preparing these villages before the beginning of another major offensive operation from the south and the north. So the battle for Dobropolye intensifies. As for the Druzhkovka-Konstantinovka direction, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received anything special, just small changes to the south of Nikolopolye, but these changes tell us that the Russians began advancing in the northern direction with the purpose to take this village under complete control. The most important updates as of the Drushkovka-Slavyansk direction are coming from the city of Lyman. This morning, pro-Russian sources published this video where we can see more flags and more Russian troops through the city of Lyman. In this video, we can see how Russian soldiers were moving through different streets and different parts of the city of Lyman, and how Russians were raising their Russian flag. For example, during this video, there were at least 3 flags recorded. Two flags were recorded in this area, and one of the flags was recorded right exactly in the area of this church. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and currently we can say that the city of Lyman has collapsed completely. Most likely the Ukrainians still have some partial control over the most western parts of the settlement, but the Ukrainians use these territories just for one purpose, for evacuation purposes, which means that in coming days most likely the Russians will announce complete control over the settlement, and probably the days are numbered before the Russians do this. Most likely by the end of this weekend the Russians will announce this information. At the same time, the Russians intensify their activities along this line of Slavyansk and Nikolaevka. More and more videos were received from this area. For example, during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the Russians destroyed several temporary deployment points in this area, trying to soften the Ukraine's defenses. The Russians, as we can see, continue their offensive operation. As for the northern directions, the Russians, as we discussed during the previous videos, improved their positions to the west of the settlement of Belye Kolodezh. Today, the group of forces north, the second time in a row, reported that the clashes currently are taking place on the territory of the settlement of Ukrainska, and that the Russians continue advancing further in the direction of the settlement of Belye Kolodezh, basically right now from behind. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their offensive operation also through the northern direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes and additional explosions were recorded through the Kharkiv direction. In this video, we can see the Russians discovered a temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine and destroyed it. In the area of the settlement of Zolochev, the Russians attacked an object of energy infrastructure, and as a result of this attack, this object of energy infrastructure was completely destroyed. The Russians are trying to soften defense through the northern Kharkiv direction, and during the previous 12 hours, lots of explosions once again were recorded through the most northwestern parts of the city of Kharkiv. The Russians are trying to destroy warehouses and ammo depots that Ukrainians use to support their contingent on the territory of the villages of Kazachia, Lopon and Zolochev. As you can see, the situation remains tense. In coming hours, in coming days, we are waiting additional reports from the Russian side about additional changes on the ground. And that's it for the short video. The Military with Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.